Hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Blackwell. I am president of Blackwell Management Solutions, and I'm also an IMSA Fund board member. I just wanted to start off by saying every single time I come to IMSA and I'm in contact with the students or alums, I am beyond impressed. I know that this is a very smart group of people, but boy, are you all talented. Thank you so much. It's my opinion that you have made Martin Luther King proud today. I'm proud, honored actually to be here with all of you. I'm actually here to thank Chase, JP Morgan Chase, for being a sponsor here. This has been thus far, a phenomenal event. I believe it's the first of its kind here, and clearly money well spent. So thank you very much, Chase. Before I get started, I wanted just to take a quick moment to make a comment on Dwan's comment about singing through it. As I listened through the presentation, the song that comes to mind is the one, and I'm not a singer, that's, we're not where we ought to be, or we're not where we ought to be, but we're not where we used to be. Thank you, Lord, and I believe that that's true. And if that weren't the case, I wouldn't be standing here today. So thank you very much. There are a number of people, I believe, from JP Morgan Chase. If we can have those folks stand so that we can applaud you and thank you again for being the sponsors, we'd really appreciate that. For those of you that don't know, JP Morgan Chase has been a strong supporter of IMSA's STEM extension program in Chicago Public Schools for the past 4 years, providing $145,000 in support for teachers and student programs in under-resourced schools serving economically disadvantaged students. Each year, Chase and its foundation give hundreds of millions of dollars and volunteer hours to thousands of nonprofit organizations across 42 states and 37 countries around the world. On behalf of IMSA, the IMSA Fund, we're just delighted that you could donate your resources to IMSA. It's my honor to introduce you to James Gilliam, a seasoned professional with 33 years of banking experience. He is currently the Vice President and Senior Community Relations Manager for the Midwest region of the U.S., in which he manages relationships with all its external stakeholders, including nonprofit organizations, community advocates, multicultural organizations, and government and community entities. One of his proudest moments and most successful opportunities was working with 3 other individuals to start and build the in-store banking division of the First National Bank of Chicago, which is now JP Morgan Chase. James received numerous individual awards for his community service and outstanding achievements, including in 2012 being honored by the National Defender newspaper as one of the 50 Men of Excellence. James is actively involved not only at Chase, but in his church and community, including his current board membership with Metropolitan Family Services and the Black Ensemble Theater. James will speak to us today about Chase's Technology for Social Good program, specifically the King Center Imaging Project, a project that truly leverages Chase technology expertise for the benefit of the social good. Please join me in welcoming James.
Good morning. I have some prepared words to speak, and one of your alumni, Charlie Corrigan, I'll promise I'll get to them. But in sitting here this morning and listening to the students and listening to Dr. Bond, I had to reflect. So I'm going to go off and it's always dangerous when you go off cue. But I'm going to go off the planned remarks here for a minute and talk about what this day means to me. On the way out this morning, I was listening to some of our urban radio stations, and they're playing a lot of speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King. I heard a story this morning that I didn't recall that I'll share with you, and I'll paraphrase it as best I can. I'm also going to take this liberty because I think we are a little ahead of schedule, so I'll fill in some of that time. And Dr. Bond will be able to correct me or clarify some of what I heard this morning simply because he was a very good friend of Dr. King. But I understand, listening this morning, that Dr. King was in New York many years ago, and he was there to autograph and sign his first book. And a young lady walked up to him and asked if he was Dr. King, and he indicated that he was. And she stabbed him in his chest. And upon stabbing him in his chest, I think he was in Harlem, he was rushed to a Harlem hospital, and the wound came very close to the main vein leading into his heart. And doctors basically shared with him a couple of days later that if he had only sneezed, he probably would have died. And he went on to talk several years later, thanking God that obviously spared his life at that time. And he talked about letters that he had received in the hospital. Letters from all over the world, letters from the mayor, governor, wishing him well. He went on to talk about those letters and not being able to remember exactly what was written in those letters, but it was one particular letter from a 9th grade student that he remembered well. And I'll paraphrase, but she wrote Dr. King while he was in the hospital, and he said, although it wasn't important, she shared with him that she was a 9th grader, a white student at a high school there in New York, and she thanked God that his life was spared. And he went on to share that with all the letters that he had received from very important people around the world, this was one letter that stood out. And God spared his life at that time so that he could see and finish, and I won't say finish because I'm quite certain he had a lot of work to do, but he went on to finish and see many of the things that we all enjoy that we call civil liberties and civil rights today. And that one particular letter stood out. So as I was sitting here this morning, and I don't share this with many, but as I was sitting here this morning, I thought about reflecting back on my life. I call myself Double Nickels. I'm 55 years old. I've been with JP Morgan Chase, by the way, of First Chicago, for 33 years. Never thought I would go into banking and stay in banking. Quite frankly, back at the time, it was a way to employment. I had been unemployed for 9 months and had a few weeks left before unemployment ran out and was able to secure a position with the First National Bank of Chicago, now JP Morgan Chase. But the story I would like to share with you is that things happen for a reason, and most of you are too young to remember, but there was an American Airlines flight that took out from Chicago back in 1978. It was on its way to Los Angeles, California. I had never been to Los Angeles, California, and had decided that I was going to go to LA. I was fairly young at the time, and enjoy a week of vacation and probably partying in LA. But at the time, the economy was extremely bad. Gas lines, gas shortages, lines of cars around the block trying to get a gallon of gas, or a couple of gallons of gas. It wasn't the price it is today. To make a long story short, on Wednesday, I decided to change my flight arrangements and go to Atlanta. But I didn't tell many people. So on Friday, got out to the airport, boarded my Delta flight to Atlanta. But the flight was delayed, didn't realize why it was delayed. Got to Atlanta, rented a car, got to my hotel in Atlanta after I figured out which Peach Street to drive on. Turned on the television and realized that there was a terrible plane crash here in Chicago. American Airlines Flight 191 crashed 5-10 minutes after taking off here in Chicago, and hundreds of passengers were killed. Seconds later, I realized that that was my flight. Now, I don't profess to have any or many things in common with Dr. King, but listening this morning about how he was a sneeze away from dying and realizing that I was only a few days away, and for some reason God spared my life. And I thank God as I think about those things daily. I thank God that he spared my life. So one day, and I had never dreamed that I would be on a podium, on a stage, sharing the stage with Dr. Bonds or speaking to a group of students. Never dreamed about that. But I thank God daily that he gives me another day. He's not done with me yet, that I can reach back and say something to young students like yourself that will impact your life maybe 30 years from today. When I address students, I always tell them that it's not very important to remember my name, to remember who I am, but hopefully there's something that I'll say today will stick with you and will have an impact on your life. And maybe 25 or 30 years from today, or maybe even shorter, you'll have an opportunity of addressing a group of kids, because I am a firm believer that we should never forget the history, the struggle. I was born in 1958. So I was a baby when the struggle was taking place. I remember November 22nd, the year of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The reason why I remember that, not because it's on TV every year, the anniversary, but that's my birthday. So on November 22nd, it reminds me many times of how my parents felt on that day. I remember the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and others. And I firmly believe that I stand on the shoulders of those individuals, and I would never want to forget their struggles. So when I listen to the students today and your signs, and I know that you have to rehearse and read and go through learning those lines, and I think you did a wonderful job. But what I would like to see is that those words that you spoke, you really keep in your heart. And that when you have children, that you teach those children the history that some people would like us to forget. But I would like to see you teach the history that's being taught to you, and that 100 years from today, that they'll have a program in a facility that will trump the program that we have today, and that individuals will continue to pass this message on to their children, because I guarantee you, I know for a fact that some people would just like to forget. They would like to forget the battles that Dr. Bond talked about. History books are being changed, and many of these stories are being left out. I personally talk to friends, black and white, that have a challenge. There's an excellent movie out, and I will move on, and God, just spare with me for getting off line here. But there's a movie out, 12 Years a Slave. Very controversial. I spoke to Louis Gossett a few weeks ago at an event in Chicago Urban League event. and he suggested that I go see this movie. And when he suggested that I see this movie, I thought about who he was. He was in Roots. And he shared with me that this is a movie that I needed to see. I've passed this on to people that are personally friends of mine, and some people don't want to live that, don't want to see it. It's very painful. And I agree. It's the type of movie that will punch you in your stomach. Very emotional at the end. But it's history. And it's just something that we need to see. So I wrote some notes as I was sitting down here, and one stood out. It's just never forget. I wrote it 3 times. Never forget. Never forget the struggle and the battle that we all are faced with. And the only baton that I have to pass to you today is for you to pass that message on. One day you'll have spouses of your own, you'll have kids. Pass the message on. Okay, Charlie, I'll get to my remarks now. Thank you for entertaining me and allowing me the opportunity to share some of that with you this morning. I would like to thank my God for again sparing me life and time to address you. When Charlie asked me to come out this morning for this event, he had me following directly behind Dr. Bond. And then he looked at it, and he said, well, maybe we'll move you a little further down. Quite frankly, I wish he would have had me start, because even following Dr. Bond and the students, you all have raised the bar. But I hope that there are some things that I'll say today, again, that will resonate with you. I would like to start off by thanking, again, Dr. Bond. I'd like to thank my girlfriend and wife of 25 years for putting up with me. I'd like to thank you here at the Illinois Math Science Academy for having us here. Dr. Bond talked about a lot of civil and social responsibilities. And here at Chase, I'm pleased to say that I've been with this company now in this firm. April 13th, it'll be 33 years. I've seen a lot of change. Never thought that I would go into banking back in April 13th of 1981 and still be here. Never thought that being here, I used to participate in MLK programs at our firm for the last 27, 28 years. I used to be the usher, kind of handing out brochures similar to the one that I hope everyone received today back in 1981. And we had guest speakers coming in. Never dreamed that at 21 or 22 that I would continue up the ranks and one day be asked to be the individuals that I used to sit out there and see address a group. I was invited to be 2 places today. One was with the United Negro College Fund breakfast in Washington, D.C., where they had roughly about 900 people coming to a breakfast. And they wanted to see the imaging project that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes. They wanted to see Dr. King's exhibit that we were able to fund and travel around the country. And then I received the invite to come here as well. And not sharing with you what happened in between the two, but I'm so happy that I was able to come here in my home state, drive out to Aurora this morning to address students. I'm certain that the breakfast that is probably going on at this time in the Maryland area is a very nice breakfast. I don't think hundreds and hundreds of students will be there. Probably quite a few elected officials, et cetera, will be there. But I'm glad to be here with you this morning. So what I did was ship about 700, 800 of these documents to DC at the same time of shipping about 700 or 800 of these documents here to your school. And in these documents, and some of the slides that I'll show you, is a program that we funded with the King Center. Years ago, you would have to travel to Atlanta to see many of these documents that are now online. You travel to Atlanta, go to the King Center, or you travel to Memphis, go to the Lorraine Hotel, and you can kind of see some of the documents that we have online here. A few years ago, the King Center, the King family came to us, JP Morgan Chase. Make a long story short, they wanted to know if we had the ability of digitizing thousands and thousands of documents from Dr. Martin Luther King. And we took some of our technology inside the firm. We hired and brought in students from Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Emory, and veterans. And we showed them how to use our document scanning equipment to digitize many documents that were sitting in boxes. Many of these documents, thank God, had never been destroyed by fire or flood, but they were literally sitting in boxes. Some of them were large documents, some of them were telegrams, some of them were the famous report cards that you may hear, and I'll share with you and talk about a little bit. And other documents were sermons and speeches and letters that Dr. King had written from the Birmingham jail. Now, if you can imagine these documents being destroyed and how that would have been horrible, but they weren't destroyed. And because of our ability to help digitize these documents, we now have them to not only share here with you today, but to share around the world at the click of the internet. Most of you, or all of you, should have this brochure that we handed out. It makes a great poster as well. But last year, for the last 2 years, I was able to travel around with this particular exhibit. We had the exhibit in Chicago. I was with the exhibit in Detroit, at the Charles Wright Museum, African American History Museum in Detroit. I was with this exhibit in Orlando with the National Association of Black Journalists. In many other locations, we had it in DC to commemorate the 50th anniversary. And what you now see through this King Imaging project are documents that were in those boxes that the family had saved over the years. And on the back of the brochure, bear with me, I have to take my glasses off to read. thekingcenter.org is the website that you can go into later on today or in the future and review many of these documents that we're only going to share with you a few pages of here on the slides. But as I talk through these documents, especially when we had the exhibit in Chicago, individuals would come up, they would ask about the documents, but there was one gentleman that came up and asked about a letter. And in this particular letter, he said that my uncle, I think it was a doctor. And he had written Dr. King back in the early 60s and offered his services. And he wondered if we had the document. He had always heard about this letter. None of us knew. There are thousands and thousands of documents. So he went and sat down at one of the computers we had and started going through the archive. And he found this letter that he had always heard about as a child, that his uncle had written to Dr. King back in the 60s, offering his services. The letter had been written the same month that he had been born. And it brought tears to his eyes. But that was just one of the stories with this King exhibit that we had here in Chicago and across the country, where people would walk up that had lived, that were much older than I, that had lived through the struggles of the late 50s and the 60s, and could relate to or had a story about some of the things that we had captured. Many sitting there for hours, reading through some of the documents and having tears roll down their face because of the struggle. I must admit with you sitting here today, especially the last two duets that sung, brought tears to my eyes. This is a very emotional day for me because I never, ever want to forget. And it's emotional for me because I saw students, I saw people that are in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade that are repeating and standing up and singing. And I think, Dewan, you said something about song. You know, singing, laughter, I'll add two others to that, and tears is what the struggle means to me. Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. Sometimes you sing to keep from crying. But what I saw today is something that will stick with me the rest of my life. And it gives me hope. It gives me hope that young students will not allow the story to die. You will not allow it to die. The diversity that I see today is much different than the diversity that I remember growing up. As I said, I'll go off my remarks here and there, but I'll share with you stories. I was a young man. I was born in '58. I went to the South. My parents are from Mississippi and Alabama. I went to the South in the early '60s because my parents wanted to take us back there. I remember standing next to my nephew in Mississippi, Macon, Mississippi, probably in '63, '64. And we were from Chicago. He didn't know any better. He went and drank out of the fountain that said for whites only. My dad almost fainted. He grabbed him as quickly as he could and shared with him that that was not allowed. These stories are true. They exist. We've come a long way. But I'll say, and this is not the opinion of J.P. Morgan Chase, this is mine, we have a long way to go. Never think that this battle is over. Okay, back on target. So, people would come up, and one came up and asked about a report card. Again, there are thousands of documents. Didn't know that the report card existed, but someone had heard that Dr. King, we had his report card, and Dr. King had received a C in public speaking. I said, well, I don't know about that, but let's go and look. And we had a drawer, and we went through the drawer, and we pulled out this report card. And on the report card, there it was. You know, his grades all the way down, up and down, and there was a C in public speaking. And I was like, wow. They were like, wow. And the only thing I could come to personally, and I had to share it, either at that time, he was a C student, and as a result of this particular professor grading him a C, it inspired him, obviously, to really sharpen his pencil. Or the professor was just totally off. And we know, speaking in a school, we don't have professors that are totally off target. But it was amazing that, that he was an average student. And the reason why I share that, and there are many other documents that I suggest you go into this site to see, is that as an average student, or what one would proclaim to be an average student, looking at his grades, he took us to a level in this country that I'm not certain any one individual will be able to take us to again in my lifetime. But that's not to say that any one of you can't pick up that baton. You know, there were bullets that took the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, but they didn't take the dream away. I think they slowed the process down, but they did not take the dream away. And I'm looking at you as individuals that can lead that dream. You can take up the baton where many of us are ready to pass it over, and quite frankly, drop it if no one is there to receive it. Or you can stay at status quo. You know, we talked about the unemployment rate being as high as it is back in the day among people of color. I don't know if you've looked lately, but that unemployment rate is still pretty high for people of color today. There are a lot of social issues and social concerns that we all should be focused on. And none of you sitting here are too young to pick up that mantle. So in closing, I would like to thank you, the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I would like to thank the state representatives that are here today. I'd like to thank the professors. I'd like to thank Dr. Bond. It's an honor. I saw this gentleman as I was a child, looking at television, never dreaming that I would be this close to him. I would like to thank Dr. King. Had the opportunity of meeting Yolanda King, his daughter, the year she died here in Chicago, never dreaming that a young black male from the south side of the city of Chicago, someone from the public school system, would be this close to shake their hands and say thank you. Never dreamed about that, never thought about it. Even when I was your age in high school, just never thought about it. Never thought that I would go to work for a bank, JP Chase, and be there 33 years later to address a group like we have here today. I will have to say that I will respect Charlie a little bit more in the office now. I won't give him such a hard time now that I see where he went to high school. Charlie is a pretty good friend and colleague of mine, and I personally will give him a hard time from time to time, and I have better respect for you now, Charlie. But I would like to thank all of you for tolerating me, allowing me to go a little over schedule, but I thought that we were a little ahead of schedule, so I thought I would fill it in with words that, again, I hope that I've shared with you today that will make you think, and for you students, pick up the baton. Thank you.